John 14:2-3. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. What did Jesus mean? The goodbye. The house was still. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the small apartment as Miriam stood in silence, clutching the worn-out photograph in her hands. It was a picture of her and her younger brother, the last one they'd taken before he passed. His smile still radiated life, frozen in time. He had been only 23. She sat on the edge of her bed, surrounded by untouched suitcases and half-packed boxes. The walls were bare now, stripped of memories, waiting for a new chapter. But Miriam didn't feel ready. She felt suspended, broken. "I thought you'd be here," she whispered toward the ceiling. Her voice cracked. "You said you'd never leave me." There had been no answers in the past few weeks, just the silence of grief and the heavy presence of unanswered questions. Why him? Why now? Why didn't you stop it? Her brother had believed in miracles. He prayed with childlike faith, and he had believed until his last breath that God would heal him. Miriam had believed too, until the machines beeped one final time, and the nurses quietly lowered their eyes. That night, Miriam stopped believing, not because she hated God, but because she felt forgotten by him. She slid down to the floor, her back pressed against the bed. The photo dropped beside her, her fingers clenched into fists. Then, a whisper, soft, gentle, impossible to describe but undeniable. "Let not your heart be troubled." She froze, her breath hitched. "Believe in God. Believe also in me." Her eyes widened. The words weren't hers. She hadn't read her Bible in weeks, but they echoed in her soul like a familiar voice breaking through a storm. "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." The room faded. Suddenly Miriam wasn't sitting in her apartment anymore. A room lit by oil lamps, wooden walls, the smell of roasted lamb and bitter herbs in the air. 12 men sat around a long table, their faces tense with questions. At the center, Jesus. His eyes scanned each one of them with deep love. He knew their hearts, their fears. He knew what was coming: the cross, the betrayal, the silence of Saturday, the confusion that would follow. But tonight, he had one more thing to give them: hope. "Let not your heart be troubled," he said, breaking the silence. Peter stirred. Thomas leaned in. John's heart beat fast. "You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." Thomas, always honest, looked up. "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" Jesus smiled, not in mockery but in mercy. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me." The room held its breath. These were more than words. They were eternal. Miriam gasped as if waking from a vision. Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't even realize she had been crying. The words still echoed, "I go to prepare a place for you." She didn't know how, but in that moment something broke inside her. Not her heart, that was already broken, but the wall, the silence. He hadn't left her, not even in her sorrow. She had just stopped listening. The funeral had passed. The guests were gone. Life was expected to resume, but Miriam wasn't the same. One morning, weeks later, she walked through the cemetery gates with a white rose in her hand. The sun was rising. A quiet breeze blew through the tall trees. She knelt by her brother's grave. "You always said heaven was real," she whispered. "I wasn't so sure, but now..." She looked up. "I think I'm starting to believe you." She laid the rose down. "He's preparing a place for you," she said softly. "And for me too." Her phone buzzed. A message from her new church group. They were meeting to pray and support one another through grief. For the first time in a long time, she replied, I'll come." The road to the promise. The heat was unforgiving. Dust clung to the soles of his feet like guilt to his memory. Jonas kept walking. Each step was heavy, not from the distance, but from everything he carried inside. He had left home 3 years ago with big dreams and loud promises. "I'll make it. I'll come back rich. I'll build Mama a house. Just wait and see." But now, he was returning empty-handed, worse than empty. He had gambled away what little he had left. He had trusted the wrong people. And somewhere along the way, he had lost himself too. The village road stretched endlessly ahead of him, lined with familiar trees that once held his childhood laughter. Now even the birds seemed to chirp in judgment. "They won't take you back. You failed. You don't belong anywhere anymore." He clenched his jaw. If only he could disappear. Maybe that's why he kept walking. If he walked far enough, maybe shame wouldn't follow. But it always did. As he passed a narrow bend in the road, something caught his attention. A little chapel, long abandoned, standing crooked beneath a weeping tree. Jonas remembered it. He used to sit on its steps as a child, throwing pebbles and listening to the old preacher's stories. He paused, hesitated, then slowly stepped inside. It smelled of dust and forgotten prayers. But in the silence, something stirred. On the wall, barely hanging, was an old painting, faded, cracked, but clear enough. It showed Jesus standing at the gates of heaven, arms wide open. Behind him, a golden city shimmered in the distance. Below, carved in peeling letters, were the words, "I go to prepare a place for you." Jonas stared at it for a long time. "For people like me?" he whispered bitterly. Then a sound, not loud, not audible to the ear, but it struck his soul. "Even for you, far away in time but close in spirit." Another road stretched under another man's feet. This one walked slowly through Jerusalem's outskirts, his steps deliberate, his eyes set on eternity. The cross loomed closer with every breath, but he didn't flinch, because he wasn't just walking toward death. He was walking to prepare a place for the broken, for the proud, for the prodigal, for the failures and the forgotten, a place where guilt could not follow, where shame is swallowed by grace. "I go to prepare a place for you." He had spoken those words the night before, over bread and wine. Now he was carving that promise into reality, not with tools, but with his very body. The carpenter was building a home, with nails. Back to Jonas, the turning point. Jonas sat on the chapel floor. The painting stared back at him, and then it hit him. Not as a thought, but as a wave. This place, this heaven, wasn't for the perfect. It was for the returning, just like his father's house. He remembered the last time he saw his dad, arms crossed, silent, disappointed. Jonas had shouted on his way out, "I don't need this life. I'll build my own." But now, he needed home. He rose, dusted his shirt, and for the first time in a long time he prayed, "Lord, if there's still a place, even for me." Silence, then peace, deep and strange, as if heaven whispered, "There is. Come home." The sun was low when Jonas turned the last corner to his village. From a distance, he saw his father, older now, leaning against the gate. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was mercy. But the old man ran like dignity didn't matter, ran like love had no shame. When they met, no words were needed. The father wrapped his arms around his son and wept. "You're home. That's all that matters." "I go to prepare a place for you," Jesus said, "not just in heaven, but in every heart that returns to him, in the arms of a waiting father, in the welcome of mercy, in the place where your past no longer defines you." The room she never used. The tea kettle whistled. Evelyn moved slowly, careful not to let her arthritic hands tremble too much as she poured steaming water into the chipped porcelain teacup. She had set the table for two, like she always did. One cup for her, and one for someone else, someone who never came. The room was warm with the scent of cinnamon and old wood. Outside, snow began to fall over the quiet street. Another winter had arrived. Another year had passed, and still, the second chair remained empty. Evelyn sat by the window, her fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. Across from her, the second cup waited. She looked at it, then sighed. 40 years, she murmured. It had been 4 decades since her daughter Sarah had walked out the front door, angry, bitter, shouting that she never wanted to see Evelyn again. They had argued about faith, about choices, about forgiveness. Evelyn wanted her daughter to stay. Sarah wanted to leave everything, even God, behind. That was the last time she saw her. No phone call, no postcard, no apology, only silence. But every Sunday morning, Evelyn would sit in church, lips trembling over the same verse. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. And she would whisper under her breath, prepare one for her too, Lord. Evelyn never changed Sarah's bedroom. It stayed untouched, with soft curtains and a pink quilt folded at the foot of the bed. A little wooden cross still hung over the headboard. Neighbors told her it was foolish. She's gone, Evelyn. She's probably not even alive. You're wasting your life waiting. But Evelyn smiled through it all. She'll come home, she'd say, even if not to me. She'll come home to Jesus. She believed it, because Jesus had promised. I go to prepare a place for you. And if he could prepare a place for her daughter in eternity, then surely she could prepare one here on earth. Oh, flashback, Jesus and the thief. On a hill called Golgotha, 2 crosses stood beside the Savior. One man hurled insults, but the other, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, bruised and bleeding, looked at him with the same love he had for kings and prophets, and whispered, today you will be with me in paradise. No track record, no time left to fix his life, just one moment of faith. And Jesus made space for him, a place, prepared, promised. Back to Evelyn, the knock at the door. It was a quiet afternoon. The snow had stopped. Evelyn had just finished her prayer when there was a soft knock. 3 gentle taps. She froze. No one knocked anymore. She lived alone. The mail came through a slot. The neighbors rarely visited. Her heart began to race as she shuffled toward the door. She opened it slowly, and there, under the gray winter sky, stood a woman. Early 60s, faint lines around her eyes, a worn duffel bag hanging from her shoulder. Mom? She said. Evelyn dropped her cane. Tears fell before words did. They sat at the table, 2 cups of tea, just like she had always hoped. I don't know why I came back, Sarah said, voice trembling. Something just called me. I was tired, empty. I remembered the verses you used to say, and I wondered if he could still love someone like me. Evelyn reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands into her frail ones. He never stopped. A long silence. Sarah looked up, her voice breaking. Do you think there's still a place for me? Evelyn smiled through her tears. There's always been a place for you. In this house, in my heart, and in his. Some promises take a lifetime to bloom. Some prayers take decades to answer. But in the waiting, God is still working. In the silence, he is still preparing. Because Jesus didn't just speak to the disciples in the upper room. He was speaking to mothers and prodigals, sons and daughters, wanderers and weary hearts. I go to prepare a place for you. A place, even for the one who left, the man in the hospital room. The beeping was steady, too steady. Each sound was a reminder that time was running out, that with every passing moment, he was drifting further from the world he had built. Mr. Wallace had once been a man people feared, a retired corporate lawyer, sharp tongue, no nonsense, no faith. He built an empire of success without prayer. He built a legacy of wealth without love. He built a fortress around his heart and called it wisdom. Now cancer was tearing it all down. The machines hummed. The ceiling stared back blankly. And all the diplomas in the world couldn't keep death from approaching. The quiet nurse. Amara was different. She was new, gentle, quiet, a nurse, but also something else. She moved with peace, not just the kind that comes from training, but the kind that comes from knowing something bigger, someone bigger. Mr. Wallace hated that at first. "I don't need your smiles," he had growled one morning. Amara had only nodded and said, "Okay," but later she left a folded paper on his bedside table. Inside was a verse, John 14:2-3. "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." He ignored it, but he didn't throw it away. That night the pain was worse. He gritted his teeth as the medication wore off. He stared at the folded paper again. He had read many contracts in his life, but never read this one properly. He picked it up. "I go to prepare a place for you." He laughed bitterly. "What place? I never made room for him. Why would he make room for me?" He drifted off, or maybe he died for a moment. No one ever knew. But what he saw was real. He stood in a hallway, endless, filled with doors. Some were open, glowing, others closed. Then came a voice, not booming, not frightening, just calm. "You never invited me into your life, but I still prepared a place in mine." He turned. There stood Jesus, not with anger, not with judgment, but with mercy in his eyes. "You can still come," he said, "even now, but I wasted everything," Mr. Wallace whispered. "My time, my life. I never believed." Jesus stepped closer. "But I never stopped loving," he gasped awake. The heart monitor steadied. Amara stood near the window, her back to him. She turned, surprised to see him fully alert. He looked at her, eyes wide, tears flowing freely down his face. "Tell me, is it too late?" She smiled and sat beside him. "Never." She opened her Bible and read aloud. "I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also." He closed his eyes and whispered, "Then I believe. I want that place." 2 days later, the room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't empty. His bed was empty, yes, but the place that had once been dark was now full of peace. There was no struggle. He simply went home. The moment he opened his eyes again, the light was nothing like hospital fluorescence. It was warm, alive, golden. Jesus stood waiting. No clipboard, no judgment, just open arms. "I prepared this for you," he said. Mr. Wallace fell to his knees. "I don't deserve it. No one does. That's why I paid the price for it." Behind Jesus, a door swung wide open, and Mr. Wallace stepped into everything he never thought could be his. It's never too late. Not for the thief on the cross, not for the prodigal, not for the proud, because heaven is not earned, it's received. "I go to prepare a place for you," Jesus said. "And if he prepares it, he'll make sure you get there." The little boy who believed. He was only 8, small hands, big heart, and a smile that refused to fade, even when everything else did. His name was Eli. He wore a red superhero cape almost every day, not because he thought he could fly, but because he believed God could. Eli was fighting leukemia. The doctor said he wouldn't make it to his 9th birthday, but Eli didn't worry about birthdays. He was more excited about something else. "I'm going to see Jesus," he would say, as if he was talking about a summer vacation. A confused doctor. Dr. Lena Hall had seen a lot in her 20-year career, but Eli confused her. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He didn't ask why. He just believed. "Isn't heaven scary?" she asked one afternoon. Eli blinked, then shook his head. "No, Jesus said he's building a place for me, like my own superhero castle, and there's a puppy there waiting for me." She chuckled despite herself. "A puppy?" "Yup. I asked him for one. He was so sure, so certain, and for some reason, she envied him." That night, Dr. Hall couldn't sleep. She had seen too many children pass, and somewhere along the way she had stopped praying, stopped hoping, because hope was dangerous when you watched it get buried. But Eli, he talked like he had already been to heaven and back. One morning, Dr. Hall found a picture taped to her office door. Crayons, messy handwriting. stick figures stood in front of a giant golden gate. One of the figures had wild curly hair like Eli's. Another had a white coat and glasses. At the top it read, "Dr. Lena, I saved you a place." She sat down and cried. For the first time in years, she wanted to believe again. Eli's breathing slowed. His mother held one hand. Dr. Hall held the other. He opened his eyes weakly. "Tell Jesus, I'm ready," he whispered. His mother kissed his forehead. "He already knows, baby." A faint smile. One last breath, then silence. Except the kind of silence that's filled with peace. The air shimmered. Eli stood barefoot on soft grass. His red cape blew in the wind. Ahead of him, a vast city of golden light. No IVs, no pain, no hospital gowns. Jesus knelt in front of him, smiling. "I've been waiting," he said. "And yes, the puppy's here too." Eli ran into his arms. He was home. A week later, Dr. Hall opened a letter left by Eli's mom. It contained a Bible verse. "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." John 14:2. Below it was a message. Eli said that heaven is real, and he hopes you believe it too. He saved you a place. Faith doesn't require age. Hope doesn't demand logic. And belief isn't reserved for the strong. Sometimes the deepest faith comes from the smallest hearts. "I go to prepare a place for you," Jesus said, "even for the little ones." The prisoner who found freedom. The clang of metal echoed through the cold stone corridor. Dorian had been behind bars for 17 years. A life sentence, murder. One moment of rage. One night that changed everything. He was 24 when they locked the gate. Now he was 41, with nothing but regret echoing through his soul. He didn't speak much anymore. Didn't write. Didn't call family. Most had forgotten him, and truthfully, he didn't blame them. He didn't want to be remembered. The cell was his punishment, but guilt was his prison. The new chaplain. They called her Sister Ray. She was small, middle-aged, wore round glasses, and always carried a book that looked older than the prison itself. A leather-bound Bible. She walked past the hardened men without flinching, spoke gently but firmly, sat with murderers and thieves and treated them like souls, not sinners. She came to Dorian's cell once a week. At first, he wouldn't speak, just stared at the wall. She would read anyway, not preach, just read. One day she opened to John 14. "Let not your heart be troubled," she began. He looked up, just slightly. "I go to prepare a place for you." Something in him cracked, but he said nothing. That night Dorian lay on the stiff mattress, the verse repeating in his head like a haunting melody. "A place for you." He laughed bitterly. "For people like me? You've got the wrong man, God." He covered his face with both hands and wept for the first time in 12 years. "You saw what I did. You know, there's no room for monsters in heaven, but silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it carries an answer. There's room. I made it." He sat upright, startled. He heard no voice, not audibly, but something had spoken deep within, and it wouldn't let him go. Flashback, the criminal on the cross. Beside Jesus, 2 criminals hung. One cursed, the other cried out, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He had nothing to offer, nothing to redeem himself. But Jesus didn't ask for his resume. He gave him a promise. "Today you will be with me in paradise." Even from the cross, Jesus was still preparing a place. Back in the cell, redemption. Dorian couldn't sleep. The next morning, when Sister Ray passed by, he whispered, "Is that verse real?" She stopped. Every word. He nodded slowly. "Do you think he meant it? That he'd prepare a place, even for me?" She stepped closer, tears in her eyes. "That's exactly who he meant it for." Dorian bowed his head. "Then I want it. I want the place. I want him." She led him in prayer, not a rehearsed one, but a broken one. And as the chains around his soul broke, the sun spilled through the tiny window. He was still in prison, but for the first time in nearly 2 decades, he was free. Dorian became the prison's worship leader. He taught Bible classes. He mentored the young men. He wrote letters to families he once abandoned. He never got out, at least not physically, but he had already been welcomed into something eternal. On the night of his passing, the guard said he was smiling. His Bible was open to John 14. I go to prepare a place for you. Someone had underlined it in red ink, and next to it he had scribbled, even for me, some walls are made of concrete, others are made of guilt, but Jesus breaks both, because the place he prepares is not for the perfect, it's for the redeemed. I go to prepare a place for you. Even if you've spent your life behind bars, he never locked you out of grace. The lace hung untouched in the closet, delicate, ivory, unworn. Amira had picked out the dress a year ago. She had run her fingers across every detail, the beaded neckline, the soft tulle skirt, the veil stitched with tiny pearls. She'd imagined walking down the aisle, locking eyes with Kofi, and beginning the life they had planned. But life didn't wait for plans. A week before the wedding, there was a car crash, and just like that, the future she imagined was shattered. Everyone said the right things. He's in a better place. God knows best. You'll find love again. But no one told her how to live with an empty promise and a full heart. No one told her what to do with a dress meant for a day that never came. She left it hanging, not out of hope, not out of pain, but because she didn't know whether to keep it or let it go. Days turned into months, months into a year. She went through the motions, church, work, family. But something inside her had shut down. It wasn't anger, not even depression. It was numbness. Then one day, after service, the pastor read something so familiar yet so foreign, it caught her breath in her throat. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. She sat frozen in the pew, the words wrapping around her heart like silk. It wasn't a wedding verse. It wasn't even about romance, but something about it felt bridal. She went home that night and opened her Bible for the first time in months. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. She kept whispering the same question, is there still a place for me? And somehow, deep in her spirit, the answer was already waiting. Yes, not the place she imagined with flowers and wedding bells, but a place that could never be taken away, a place that grief couldn't cancel, a place beyond death, beyond disappointment, a place where joy never fades. She dreamed that night. In the dream, she stood in a field, barefoot, dressed in white, but it wasn't the dress from the closet. This one shimmered like starlight, light as breath, woven not with fabric but with glory. Ahead, someone stood waiting, not Kofi, but someone she knew and had always known, Jesus. He extended his hand. I prepared this for you, he said softly, and behind him, a city glowed. Alive, eternal. Every pain she had known faded in his eyes. She woke up crying, not the bitter tears that had followed her for months, but new tears, freeing tears. She walked to the closet, slowly, opened it. The dress was still there. She smiled. She didn't need it anymore, because the wedding she was really waiting for wasn't canceled. It was just postponed, for glory. From that day on, she began to live again, not because the pain was gone, but because the promise was real. She joined the worship team. She led women's groups. She spoke quietly with young girls about waiting, about loss, about trusting Jesus with broken stories. Because now she understood what it meant when he said, I go to prepare a place for you. It wasn't just heaven. It was hope. It was restoration. It was a love story that never ends. Years later, when she finally met someone and did walk down the aisle, it wasn't in the same dress and it wasn't the same dream. But her heart wasn't looking to the altar. It was looking higher, because she knew no matter what happened here, her place was already prepared. And when her time finally came, when age caught up with her and her eyes grew dim, her family gathered by her bedside. Her daughter, the same one who had once worn her veil in play, held her hand and asked, Mama, are you afraid? She smiled weakly, then shook her head. I'm just getting ready to go home. As her breath slowed, her lips formed the words one last time. He said, he went to prepare a place, and then she was gone. But not lost, because love always keeps its promise, and Jesus always keeps his. The taxi pulled up to the quiet church with a soft crunch of gravel. Marcus stepped out, suitcase in hand, looking like a man who had walked through storms and was still soaking wet inside. He hadn't been here in years. The church hadn't changed much. The same creaky doors, the same chipped wooden sign out front, and the same gentle wind that seemed to whisper across the stained glass windows. He stood there, unmoving, staring at the old bell tower. He wasn't here for worship. He wasn't here for forgiveness. He had come to say goodbye to his father, the one man he'd spent most of his life running from. The funeral was small, a few old friends, some distant cousins, and a pastor who tried to sound warm but didn't know Marcus at all. They spoke of his father's kindness, his quiet wisdom, his love for Jesus. Marcus didn't say a word. His last conversation with his dad had ended in shouting, and silence followed for 5 straight years. He had missed the last call, ignored the birthday message, told himself, "I'll reach out next week," but the next week never came. Now, he stood in the back row of a small chapel, surrounded by strangers and guilt, listening to a preacher say, "He's with the Lord now." Marcus wanted to believe it, but more than that, he wanted to know if it was too late for him. After the service, he wandered into the sanctuary alone. The air was still, heavy with memory. The pulpit sat empty. He ran his fingers across the edge of it, remembering the Sundays he used to sit in the back row, doodling while his father taught about heaven. He used to roll his eyes when his father quoted John 14, but the words haunted him now. "In my Father's house are many mansions." He sat down in the second pew, elbows on knees, face in hands. "I don't know how to get there," he whispered. "I don't even know if I believe anymore." There was no lightning, no voice from the heavens, just stillness. And then, something unexpected. He remembered something his dad once said, not in a sermon, but late one night when Marcus was 17 and angry at the world. "I know you don't understand me," his father had said, "and maybe you won't for a long time, but I want you to know something, son. No matter where you go or how far you fall, there's always a place for you, in my home, in my heart, and in his." At the time, Marcus had scoffed. Now those words hit like thunder in his soul. He looked around at the old church and then upward. God, if there's still a place, if he was right. He didn't finish the sentence, just sat there. Let the tears come, let the silence speak. That night he stayed in the guest room of the old parsonage. Dusty photos lined the bookshelf. One showed Marcus as a boy, riding on his father's shoulders, both of them laughing. He hadn't laughed like that in years. He walked over to the window, opened it slightly, and let the cold air rush in. He whispered, "I want to come home." It wasn't about the town or the house. It was about God. He was tired of running, tired of wandering, tired of carrying wounds he pretended weren't there. He knelt by the bed. No fancy words, just surrender. A single moment of belief. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window. The world looked different, not because it had changed, but because Marcus had. He returned to the city a week later, joined a local church, wrote letters to people he had wronged, started living like someone who knew, really knew, that Jesus hadn't just prepared a place somewhere far away, but had also prepared a path to get there. Years passed. Marcus became the man he never thought he could be. Gentler, slower to speak, quicker to forgive. When he became a father himself, he read John 14 to his daughter every night, just like his own father had. And one day when she asked, "Daddy, do you think Jesus really has a room for me?" he pulled her close and smiled. "I think he's decorating it just for you." She giggled. And Marcus knew, in his heart, in his bones, in every inch of his redeemed soul, that he belonged, not because he had earned it, but because someone had gone ahead and made space for him. He carried that promise with him for the rest of his life, and when his time came, when his breath grew slow and his family gathered near, he looked up and whispered with a peaceful grin, "I'm just going to the room he made for me." And with that, he closed his eyes and walked into the home he had waited a lifetime to see. He had nothing left. No house, no family, no name anyone remembered. People on the streets just called him preacher. They didn't know where he had come from. Some said he used to be a real pastor. Others said he just talked to the sky too much. Either way, he wandered from corner to corner, always with that old, worn-out Bible stuffed in a plastic bag tied to his belt. He didn't beg, he didn't shout, he just sat. And when someone walked past with enough kindness to make eye contact, he would smile and say the same thing every time. He's making a place for you. Most people ignored him. Some mocked, others dropped coins, but a few paused because there was something in his eyes that didn't match his rags, something that looked like peace. One rainy afternoon, a young man named Caleb found himself sheltering under the same awning as the old preacher. He had just lost his job. His girlfriend had left. His mother had died 2 weeks ago, and it felt like the world was folding in on itself. The preacher looked up at him, smiling gently beneath a soaked hoodie. "You look like a man who needs to know there's more." Caleb didn't answer. "Been a hard year?" the old man asked. Caleb nodded. The preacher reached into the plastic bag and pulled out a faded slip of paper. On it was handwritten one verse in large, uneven script. "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." Caleb looked at it. His throat tightened. "I used to believe stuff like that," he muttered. "You still can," the preacher said without pressure, "but it's too late for me." "Then you must not know who said it." Caleb met his eyes. The old man continued, "Jesus wasn't making a poetic statement. He was making a promise." The rain kept falling, like the sky was washing the city clean. "I've lived in alleys, slept in churches, lost everyone I loved," the preacher said quietly. "But I've never been homeless, because I know where I'm going." Caleb stared at the paper again. "A place. For him? I don't deserve that," he whispered. "Neither do I," the preacher chuckled. "But grace doesn't check qualifications, it just opens the door." Later that week, Caleb went back to the awning. The preacher was gone, but the slip of paper had been wedged under a crack in the wall. Caleb picked it up, folded it slowly, and placed it in his wallet. Years passed. He turned his life around, found work, started volunteering, joined a Bible study. He never saw the preacher again, but sometimes, when the sky looked like rain and the streets grew quiet, he would walk the same route, just in case. One Sunday, he stood before a small church and shared his testimony. "I thought I had lost everything," he said. "But then God sent a man who reminded me that even when I didn't believe I had a future, Jesus had already prepared one." He paused, holding up the worn paper. "This was handed to me in the rain, and I've carried it every day since. It's more than a verse. It's the key that unlocked my life again." And in the crowd, a teenage girl whispered to her mother, "Do you think there's a place for me too?" Her mother's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes," she said. "He's been preparing it since before you were born." That night, stars blinked over the rooftops like heaven was listening, and somewhere in a place beyond time, a door opened, not made of gold or glass, but of grace, and inside, names were written, not in ink but in love. Every name of every soul who ever believed, every child who whispered a prayer, every runaway who returned, every doubter who dared to hope again, each one prepared for. Because when Jesus spoke those words, they weren't general, they were personal. "I go to prepare a place for you." You. The one with more failures than victories, the one who keeps coming back after falling, the one who wonders if they've missed their chance, the one who's tired, lost, done. He still goes, he still prepares, he still promises. And when the time comes, when the last breath is taken and the soul is finally still, there will be no confusion, no rejection, no locked gate, just Jesus, waiting, arms open, saying, "Welcome home. I've been preparing this for you." The sky looked different that morning. It wasn't the color, it wasn't the clouds, it was the stillness, like the earth was holding its breath. Somewhere, a trumpet would sound soon. Somewhere, the silence would be broken, not with thunder, but with glory. But down here, life moved like usual. A mother packed lunch for her children. A man stared at his reflection, wondering where the years had gone. A girl stood at a train station with a Bible clutched to her chest. A grandmother lit a candle beside a picture of her husband. A teenager who had given up on everything whispered, "God, if you're real, show me." And above them all, a door opened, not one made by human hands, but the one Jesus spoke of long ago in an upper room, a place prepared, the city they had longed for, even if they didn't have the words to describe it. The place where grief cannot enter, where time does not steal, where no goodbye is final, where every tear is seen and gently wiped away. Heaven was not just a realm above. It was real, tangible, alive. And in that place, rooms shined with light not made by the sun. One room had a violin hanging on the wall, for the girl who loved music but never had a chance to play. Another had shelves full of books and drawings, for the boy who died too young but still dreamed of stories. Another had a rocking chair and the scent of lavender, for the grandmother who always made space for others. No two places looked the same, because each one had been prepared with love, personally, intentionally, for every soul that ever dared to believe. And in the center of it all, the Lamb, Jesus, the carpenter, the King, the bridegroom. His eyes scanned the names, each name written before the foundations of the world. Not one forgotten, not one crossed out, not one accident. And then, movement. He stood, not because someone had died, but because the time had come to gather his own. He had gone, he had prepared. Now, he would return. The skies parted, not in anger, but like a curtain drawn back to reveal what was always behind the scenes. The world looked up. Some cried, some rejoiced, some trembled. But those who knew him, they smiled. The ones who had whispered prayers in empty rooms, the ones who had believed without ever seeing, the ones who had waited, sometimes in pain, sometimes in silence, but always in hope. They stood to their feet because he had come for them, not just to take them somewhere, but to bring them to himself. Where he is, they would now be. The great reunion began. Fathers met sons they never held. Daughters ran into the arms of mothers long buried. Friends laughed like no time had passed. And Jesus? He welcomed them one by one. No rush, no hurry, because eternity has no deadlines. Each one looked into his eyes and knew, this is the place. This is the promise. This is home. And as the gates stood wide, heaven's halls echoed with the song of the redeemed. No pain, no sorrow, only joy, only Jesus. So now you've heard the stories. The mother who waited, the prisoner who wept, the little boy with the red cape, the bride who never wore her dress, the man in the hospital bed, the preacher in the rain, the runaway son, and the king who never gave up on any of them. Different lives, different pain, but one promise, echoing through every chapter. I go to prepare a place for you, not because you earned it, not because you prayed the right way, or lived the perfect life, or never made mistakes, but because he loves you, because you are his. Heaven is not a myth, it's not a fantasy, it's not a reward for the elite, it is home for the weary, the wounded, the wandering, and the willing. And he didn't just speak of it, he made the way. He walked the road, he carried the cross, he defeated death, he rose, and he ascended, not to leave you behind, but to prepare your place ahead. Right now, as you listen, he is still preparing, still building, still making room, still waiting. And when the time comes, whether in quiet sleep or the sound of trumpets splitting the skies, he will return. And the same voice that once called to Peter, to Mary, to Thomas, to Martha, will call your name too, and you will rise, and you will run, and you will know you were never forgotten, you were always loved, and the place he prepared was not just a room, it was rest, it was reunion, it was redemption, it was Jesus. Heaven is real, the promise still stands, the door is still open. So if you've wandered, come back. If you've doubted, believe again. If you're tired, rest in Him, because no matter who you are or where you've been, there is still a place, and it's waiting, just for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. John 14:3.